The Right Stuff.
The Right Stuff. Tom Wolfe. Have you read any of Tom Wolfe's
Never,
stuff?
and it's a huge regret. It's pathetic.
Tom Wolfe is the GOAT. And for those of you who don't know, Tom Wolfe was a journalist in the late 20th century, American reporter, who's one of the... He wrote a series of books, all totally different from the other, that all became, seminal works of like late 1900s journalism. First one was Electric Acid Kool-Aid Test, where he wrote around with like the early LSD evangelists, wrote a book about that and kind of the founding of what went on to become like the Grateful Dead. He was there for the whole thing. Wrote a book capturing that moment in time, 1968. Unbelievable book. He then wrote this other book, I believe 1979 it may have come out, about the space program, the first astronauts, called The Right Stuff, which is what I'll talk about in a sec. And the third book he wrote that was really notable was called Bonfire of the Vanities. Became like the definitive, it was a novel, but to write the novel, he embedded himself in all different aspects of New York City in like the grit and the grime of the 80s. And he got to know the city better than probably anyone else in the entire city. And he boiled that down into a book, a novel, a really epic novel that kind of captures the corruption, the politics, the race, the finance, all this kind of stuff of the city then. In any event, he wrote this book, The Right Stuff. The book is about the astronauts. And the question was, what did the astronauts have that set them apart from everybody else? Because, they were selected in the late 1950s. And at the time, the space race was everything. We had to beat the Soviets. We had to beat the Soviets into space. And it was one of the most, no one knew if we would make it. I mean, it was not a given at all that this was going to succeed. So they had to select people who were the most able to do this. And the people that they selected, they were called test pilots. These were the guys who would take early jets. We're talking the 1950s. And they would take them to the limit. And it would be, how high can you take the jet? How fast can you take the jet? How hard can it turn? You name it, everything. They would try this stuff. And 1 in 4 of them would die. It was one of the most dangerous jobs, and they would do this knowing that. And within this was only in the military ranks that people even knew they existed. And they would do this, and there was a macho thing to it. There's a whole culture within it. I believe it was mainly in the Navy pilots. And so it's not like these guys were all just like selfless heroes and like whatever, but they had a true commitment to, putting themselves on the line. They did what the nation needed them to do, and they were endlessly brave. And then they were selected to become astronauts. And now, when they selected them to become the astronauts, our rocket program was a disaster compared to the Soviets. The Soviets, they put people in space well before us, and the Soviets had way safer, better rockets. For ours, our rockets would explode all the time. And they took these guys and said, we're going to put you on top of a rocket, we're going to launch you up. And that's all it was. They couldn't control the rocket, they couldn't do anything. They would just put them on the top, send them an arc into space, and back down. That was like the promise. And they did it, which is just insane. And then you think about what we have today in our country, and you have a constant. So as I've been reading this book about how you have all these selfless astronauts doing everything, I've also been, obviously following the news. So you had first the Charlie Kirk killing. Mm-hmm. You look at the reaction to this on both sides. You got people on the right, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying we need a national divorce. You got Trump saying, he wishes the worst for his enemies. I don't forgive him. Then you've got the people on the left. Obviously, the list there is endless of people who have essentially justified Kirk's murder, celebrated it, you name it. You have no one who displays any kind of selflessness. It's all about how can I secure the quickest political points. Number one, that's it. Then you look, okay, let's look since then, right? You have Trump bringing, the DOJ, Trump bringing charges against all these different figures, right? You've got Trump bringing him against, who is it?
Letitia James.
Letitia James against
John Bolton.
John Bolton, James Comey.
Yeah, Comey.
Now, here's the thing. Republicans would say, and I think they have a point, these people did it first, right? Letitia James, she ran to be New York's attorney general saying, we're going to find the dirt on Trump. We're going to get Trump. She ran. If that's not politicizing the Justice Department, I don't know what is. Yeah. That's why even when the sentence came down, right, on appeal, they struck down the sentence because they said it was political. They said it was ridiculous. With Comey, with what he did at the FBI, there's reams of evidence to suggest that there was at least a partial political motivation, if not an overwhelming one, to what he did. John Bolton, we don't have to get into that. He's got a long thing. But the point is, what we have here is a cycle where the left does it, the right does it, the left does it, the right does it, and there's no leadership whatsoever. Totally. And I'll just give one last example of this. It's this situation with Jay Jones in Virginia. You have the guy running for Attorney General of Virginia saying he wants to shoot Republicans in the head, he wants to piss on their graves, and he wants their children to die. He actually said this stuff. Spanberger, who's running for governor, she pitches herself as a moderate, and she won't tell him to drop out.
It's insane.
There's no leadership. And then let's flip it to the other side. You've got all these insane, just idiotic, young Republicans here who had their text leaked last week, celebrating Hitler, celebrating whatever it is, just saying just blatantly racist, fascist, anti-Semitic stuff, whatever it is. J.D. Vance comes out and says, oh, boys do stupid stuff. These guys, they're up to 35 years old.
Yeah.
They're between 22 and 35 years old. They're in positions of political power. They're not kids. They're not boys. And these same exact Republicans now who are defending them, when it came time for, say, the guy at Oxford Union, when it came to any of these people who said anything about Charlie Kirk, they have to lose their job. Call up their employer, make sure they fire. There's no, this is ridiculous. Now you have these guys saying this. Oh, no, they're kids. Kids say stupid stuff. It is ridiculous. Someone needs to just have some balls and just stand up and call out the bullshit everywhere. And the fact that no politician will do this is pathetic. So the question is, why won't they do it? Why will no one stand up and just show some balls?
I think that Jay Jones is a perfect example because that's very discreet. And this is someone who's running for attorney general in a state that has, I think, 14 electoral votes. I mean, this is a big state, right? And to suggest his texts were recent, they were to a Republican colleague. He doubled down. He sent them sober. He tripled down. And for Spamberger to not be able to prioritize any sense of patriotism or decency and say, this is awful and I disavow him, not even disavow him, but like give a full-throated denunciation. She's gone through the motion. She's talked to her political consultants, her handler, and she's given out these very mute. She's smirking at Winsome Earls, who's pressing her at the Virginia gubernatorial debate on this one, not even responding, not even addressing it. And then to think of now the reaction to the leaked young Republican texts. And some people are saying, I won't condemn it because I saw some awful signs at the No Kings rally, or I saw some awful reactions to Charlie Kirk. These are, as you point out, these are staffers for Attorney General in red states. These are 31-year-olds who are interfacing with Republican leaders. These are not just, 16-year-olds who did a couple whippets and then said some crazy shit in an Xbox lobby. These are people who are potentially, they're sort of like the foot soldiers in the Republican Party. And to not just absolutely fully condemn them is pathetic. And it gets back to this question of what is the right stuff? Because one thing I found about the article fascinating is beyond some of the great turns of phrase, like the way Van Gogh brought to art A Starry Night, so did Tom Wolfe.
Glad you like that one.
A Time and Place in History. But what was the right stuff? Because these weren't like altar boys and Cubs and Eagle Scouts, the people flying these planes. So what is that right stuff we need to summon so that people who lead America have some, and I hate to say it, but balls or moxie or whatever. Balls is gender neutral, by the way. What is that right stuff they're missing?
What was interesting was a bunch of people wrote in with their takes on who has the right stuff afterwards. And they were interesting from a very, very diverse set of politically minded people. One lady wrote and said, Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma. She said, I'm sure the media can find something wrong with him, but from what I see, which actually kind of lines up with what I see. Mm-hmm. I know he tried to fight someone in the Senate, which probably isn't a sign of the
Teamsters Union president.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Probably not a sign of the right stuff. But I think he's also been pretty down to earth on other issues, and I have seen a lack of partisanship from him. Someone else wrote in, I think they said Rocana, which obviously he's a favorite of people who, he's kind of like an independently minded person. Someone wrote in from New Zealand, and they said Jacinda Ardern. You know who she is?
No.
She was like their prime minister for years. I think I don't know much about her, but they said they were from New Zealand, and she guided the country from one crisis to the next. I don't know. Don't know enough to weigh in on whatever.
She was a little COVID Nazi-ish.
Was she?
Yeah.
No, well.
She's
as long as she helped greenlight Lord of the Rings being filmed there, she can do whatever the hell she wants.
She took that Amazon money for sure.
Oh yeah, the more recent one, but yeah.
And I'm trying. There are a few others that we got today, but a mix. But you can tell people. The majority of people are like, it's no one. Like no one has this. I think one of the reasons is social media. I think
totally.
that now everything is about scoring points immediately. We know what it's like to post something and to get 10,000 likes an hour, and the dopamine feels great, right? Like you love that. these politicians are the same exact thing. They're influencers with real power,
Totally.
right? And they sit there and they post stuff. Every single time. That Cory Booker clip going against Kash Patel a few weeks ago in the Senate is pathetic. And you look at it and you're just like, dude, what is wrong with you, man? Just be normal.
Yeah.
Don't try to. But every single testimony now, they clip it up, right? Their social media teams put it out there. They're trying to get as many followers and likes and comments as possible. So that totally disincentivizes long-term thinking. I mean, anyone who's in social media understands that like short-term engagement does not mean long-term values or principles. It's the opposite, right? So they're just gambling for anything they can get right now that's going to boost their clout online.
You know what's funny is I think that, and this is going to be a hot take. And this is my hot take for the day, but I think we need to be way easier on politicians. And what I mean by that is not to suggest they've done a good job. I think the report card for politicians over the last 3 decades is abysmal. The amount of legislation they passed in the Congress, the sort of dysfunction and like caricature levels of disagreement that exists. With that said, I think it's become sort of this intellectually lazy take of politicians just want power and they're evil and they scheme behind the scenes to enrich themselves and hurt Americans. Nobody talks about businessmen that way. I mean, it's a very simplistic worldview where you're like, politicians, all they want power. Businessmen, all they want money. People are complex. And yes, the system does benefit swamp creatures and we have major problems with the system. But if everybody who goes into DC comes out looking muddy and mucky and ugly, then maybe it says more about DC or our media system than it does about these individuals. Because, yes, I think we all sort of have this underlying skepticism about anyone who wants to go to DC. It's someone who probably has an ego. They probably are, a little have a snake side to them and a little duplicitous. And they're people who often, make a killing after they leave office. But again, I think that there are some people, and we've gotten to know some behind the scenes, and you might call us naive for saying, "Oh, well, they were nice to me, and therefore they're good." I get that that's simplistic, but we know a lot of people who they are often put in impossible situations. And with our media, if you're a conservative politician and you have the left-wing media saying, "Why are you such a racist? Why do you hate women?" And every single day you get this, and then if you're left-leaning politician, they'll say, "Is it true that that you have kids in your basement?" And then there's no way to look likable after that. So I think we have this weird system that makes politicians look awful and it scares away better candidates.
I agree with that, but I also think it's changed over time. I think it's changed for a couple reasons. Another name that kept coming up in the response, they said John McCain, which I know a lot of people didn't like him for like his hawkish military views and whatever.
The Obamacare vote.
Well, he saved Obamacare, didn't he?
Yeah, no. I'm saying the conservatives don't like him. Yeah.
Yeah. But generally speaking, I feel like he's an interesting character. But he was from a prior generation.
Mm-hmm.
He actually went to the Air Force Academy or Naval Academy? I can't remember.
Air Force.
He went to school with one of my friend's grandpas. They knew
Wow.
They knew each other. They were both flew plane, or I guess one of them flew plane. I don't know. They knew each other well in college. Said John McCain was not a very nice guy. He was very kind of egotistical, whatever. That being said, when he got into power, I mean. He did. He served in the military, right? Went to a military academy. He then served in the military. He then was a prisoner of war, this whole thing, and then got into politics. And he didn't get out and make himself rich, right? Now, I know that being in politics comes with that, but I do think an issue is, to what you just said, people assume that they're in it to make money for themselves, which some of them undoubtedly are. Mm-hmm. But John McCain, he died in office, right?
Yes.
I feel like that's the cheat code.
I know.
If you die in office, then they can't be like, "Oh, he was doing it so he could get that lucrative Raytheon
we need
deal."
Older politicians. No, but it's true. I think that.
The Senate, the Roman senators, didn't they serve for life?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Fact check me on that, Rob. I don't know if
I think the Roman senators did, and then the consulates didn't. I want to say. But just as Rob looks this up, did they serve for life?
Yes.
All right, there you go.
For a reason, right?
Yeah.
I mean, literally, it's the same reason we have Supreme Court justices serve for life, right?
I know.
Because you're worried about that they'll do stuff now that's not in the country's interest. It's only in their own personal interest. We don't have this with politicians. I'm not saying we should. I mean, the idea of having an overclass of politicians who rule above the rest of us for life, no matter what, obviously I don't like. But it does solve that one specific problem of they're doing this to get whatever they do next.
I would also just say that a lot of it doesn't match my experience with some of these politicians, or that they're so one-dimensional that there's not like an inkling of patriotism with some of them. Again, So many are swamp creatures. I know people hate politicians. If we were playing it for views, we probably would have done they're all snakes and evil and lizard people. But I know some, a lot of people betray good lives to run for office, and some might be for ego reasons. I think some people also see what's happening and go, let me roll up my sleeves. And then they go to the Senate and they're utterly neutered.
Yeah.
And then some might leave after that, or some get sucked into the swamp because power is intoxicating. But anyways, I just think it's a little. I always ask people, how would you be as a politician? Do you really think you could get in there and look like you have dignity without coming off as patronizing and insincere? I guess people love to chirp, and also there's some truth to that politicians are as good as the people. And there's a bias against ever calling out. There's a bias against calling out politicians or sort of the people elected them, because you're never going to be popular by saying, people, it's you. But I think there is something to the fact that we do want, a lot of Americans want partisan politicians who will get in there and draw some blood. And that's what they want.
To be fair, it's the same with the media. It's the same with AI. You talk about, the media, it's so biased, so partisan, whatever. Yeah, because that's what people consume. It's like this AI stuff, like Sora. People are like, Sora is evil. It's so stupid. Okay, it's number one on the App Store because this is what people want. So, but the question, gets back to who can help us from ourselves, right? It's like people eat McDonald's all the time. They know it will kill them. They do it anyways. They smoke cigarettes. They drink. They know it'll kill them. They do it anyways, right? And the question is, what can be done to stop this, if anything? I think we're getting to the point now where the country's getting so divided, it actually puts the future of our nation at risk. And that's the time where it's like, okay, we can't just have this hands off. People can just decide for themselves. Because I think people can decide. People can eat themselves to death. They often drink and smoke themselves to death, and they do it anyways. What do we do to stop the country from?
Now they're scrolling themselves to death. And I think that part of, so I guess a message of optimism, because I think a lot of people, even the reaction to the piece just shows people crave this. They crave it. People admire courage. They admire bravery. They admire. I think people, whether they know much about Teddy Roosevelt's life, they idolize him because he was this sort of independent, almost rash at times, and unable to be bought or controlled, and just fearless.
Yeah.
Getting shot at a stump speech and finishing that speech. That kind of spirit of not a perfect guy by any means. Not a perfect dad. Had some really easy to drink a gallon of coffee a day.
Are you serious?
A gallon of coffee. So you have, Teddy Roosevelt had issues, but I think we loved his spirit. And I guess the optimistic point is when I think of a lot of the trips we do to places that were just ravaged by natural disaster, whether that's Western North Carolina after Hurricane Helene and the flooding and the mudslides, and the towns that were just devastated. I mean, truly devastated. Asheville's downtown was flooded, and then the mountain towns, Spruce Pine and others, destroyed. And then we think about Fort Myers when we went down to Southwest Florida for Hurricane Ian, right? Mm-hmm. And across the country, all these communities that have been ravaged either by some natural disaster or by free trade or whatever. No, sorry, that's a little too part. Obviously, the Rust Belt that's lost a lot. Is the people on the ground are unbelievable. I mean, I see a lot of the right stuff there.
That's true.
And I genuinely believe, obviously it's biased, but I really think the media, if we fix the media and social media, we would be just so much better off as a country. If we recognize that this is such junk food, it's making us sick, and the symptoms are polarization and hatred, then I think we would get off.
One last note before we get off here is something I think about is, was it Billy Graham? Was he the
Franklin? But yeah,
who was the one who was essentially the priest of the presidents?
Oh yeah, that was Reverend Graham. Yes,
and regardless of what you think about religion, I mean, his role was much bigger than being a faith leader, right? I mean, he really was someone who's entrusted by. At the same time, he would be advising the top politicians of both parties. He'd get them in rooms together. That's one of the reasons he struck a deal between LBJ and Nixon to help get Nixon elected. But it was, I mean, he was there for decades.
Presidents.
Yeah, it's incredible. The idea of this happening today, of having a faith leader who's deeply trusted by both parties, could never happen.
Well, what kills me, and just to show how toxic social media is, I feel like today, they would just find, the far right wing would find a picture of Reverend Graham kissing the wall in Jerusalem and go, the advisor to all the presidents is actually a tool of Israel to mass delude the public, and he's actually the line between, and people would believe that. And then on the left, they would dig up a quote he had, even though he was great on racial integration, and he had a close relationship with a lot of the civil rights leaders, and he helped lead that in the South. They would still dig up some cancelable quote and some misogynistic take, and so you have this culture of just sort of this sort of mindless treatment of historical figures in people's past that's so unforgiving and also naive, and then also just the conspiracy culture of nobody's flawless. And I just think that, I don't even know if Reverend Graham could exist today, and then you'd have a politician who everyone who touches him becomes radioactive. And I just think we've become brain dead and just heartless when it comes to evaluating figures. There's corruption, there's evil, obviously, but we also should live in a world where he's not treated as the spawn of Satan or some scheming person.